Thank you all for joining, and we're really excited to share this event with you. We had about 205 people register as of this morning, right, Janine?
205 as of this morning. So we just want to make sure that we're somewhere, giving some time for people to join before we jump in, but just another minute, I think. What do you think, Sarah?
I think so, yeah.
Good.
You'll be very familiar with the agenda by the time we start. If you
And please feel free to share your video. We'd love to see folks as well, but no pressure. If you are in a place that you'd rather not show your video, that's okay too.
I'll second that. I'm really excited to be here this morning. And recognize so many names logging on. So I'd love to see your face, and I really look forward to seeing your face one day in person, hopefully soon. We would love to do, I would love to be in person. This is more convenient in many ways, but hopefully one day soon we'll be in person.
Okay, I think we should get started. I'm going to put that link in there one more time. We will share it again in a follow-up, but here is the link to the survey that we're referencing here in this first slide. And feel free to check that out or just open it in a tab and fill it out later so you don't miss anything. And that's if you haven't already filled it out. All right, so good afternoon and welcome. The team of us who worked on putting this opportunity together, maybe I should make sure I'm recording. I am. The team of us who worked on putting this event together today are really heartened to see the amount of interest that it's garnered from across the state and how many folks are participating today from all different parts of the food system and geographically across the state. I'm Janine Cava. I am one of the moderators for the event today. I have a list of them here. The other moderators will be introducing themselves shortly. I am the lead facilitator and co-founder of the New Jersey Food Democracy Collaborative, which is a newly forming food policy council that has a statewide scope. We launched the Food Democracy Collaborative last June 23rd. We're almost at our 1-year anniversary. Originally with the thought that it would have a regional scope, looking at the 4 coastal counties of Ocean, Monmouth, Atlantic, and Cape May. But it became very clear from the first meeting, shortly after the first meeting, that there was robust interest, energy, and need for a food policy council type entity for the state that takes a holistic food systems approach. Our main institutional partner is Stockton University, where I'm a faculty member of the sustainability program. The Food Democracy Collaborative is currently working toward finding an ideal long-term structure. We currently have a steering committee type group that's we're calling the network facilitation team. It has right now 7 folks on it who provide feedback and guidance. And like all food policy councils, we're interested in the 3 Ps: partnerships, policy, and programs. Although we're much more focused on the first 2, public policy that supports a resilient and equitable food system, and partnership building for food system change. Before deciding to start the Food Democracy Collaborative, I spent a lot of time reading about the formation of a variety of United States-based food policy councils. I was briefly a voting member on a food policy council in Northern California when I lived there. And I've spoken at length to Rachel Santo, who we'll be hearing from shortly, our keynote, and her team at Johns Hopkins University's Food Policy Network for guidance. The Food Policy Network is an incredible resource. They have a national listserv of Food Policy Council members. It's very active. It's a wealth of information. And we're really grateful to have Rachel with us today. Like many food policy councils, we chose not to include the words Food Policy Council in our name. Food democracy speaks more to the vision, the goals, and the process that we seek. And I'd like to talk to you about the Food Democracy Collaborative for much longer, but we're keeping it brief in our overview in the beginning so we can get to all the other great things we have on the agenda today. So I'm going to hand it off to Sarah Kupas from the Food Trust for additional context and overview and introduction. And I look forward to meeting the folks in my region later on in our regional discussion groups. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Janine. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah Kupas. I work as a consultant with the Food Trust with a background really in health equity and the social determinants of health, but was brought on with the Food Trust and have been working over the last year and a half with the Food Trust. The Food Trust was approved by the New Jersey Department of Health to produce and begin implementing a strategic plan to improve health equity by increasing access to and consumption of fruits and vegetables with SNAP eligible communities and individuals. And over the last year and a half, we've done lots of work. Many of those partners that have done this work are on the call today. And through this work, we conducted a lot of interviews, strategic planning meetings, and really worked to create a solid set of 15 recommendations. We also heard about the many initiatives that are going on and taking place in New Jersey, and really what came out and what was highlighted through a lot of these conversations was really the need to streamline the work to really enhance efforts collectively. This is why it made a lot of sense when one of the strategic planning recommendations rose to the top as one of the priorities, which you can see here, to partner with community organizations to create local food policy councils to coordinate efforts that increase access to fruits and vegetables. Efforts to create, build, enhance, sustain collective work through a streamlined approach really aligns with and can really enhance the work that SNAP-Ed is already doing in their policy systems and environmental interventions, which really work to facilitate the adoption of nutrition-related behaviors to support the health and well-being of SNAP-eligible individuals in New Jersey. So myself, along with my fellow partners, who I'm really excited to be working with, in collaboration with all of you on the call, I really look forward, as we move forward into this work, how we can really clearly determine the best way to align food access and all of the efforts that you're doing locally, regionally, statewide through a more streamlined approach to benefit the state of New Jersey and all of our participants. Next, I would like to invite Sarah El-Nakib to also welcome you to the discussion. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Janine and Sarah, for kind of setting the stage and putting everything in context. And so a lot of the organizations that many of you belong to are either part of or affiliated with emergency food coalitions. These are a lot of coalitions that were created at the time of COVID to really meet the need of people who are facing food insecurity and couldn't find food to feed their families. And so these efforts are extremely important because, as we all know, we needed to make sure that everyone had enough access to food. However, this kind of strategy is working only on the individual level, right? And so we want to think now more strategically about how we can incorporate more policies and kind of environmental changes to support healthy behaviors and making sure that food access is available long term. And so our real goal is to make sure that emergency food coalitions don't exist in the future, right? Because everyone has access to food and that we have an equitable food system. And so we are all part of communities, we're part of, and we are influenced by policies. And so there are so many things that food policy councils can do to support long-term sustainable food security in our communities. So I'm just going to give a few examples, like, making sure schools have school meal programs and summer meals, having programs that improve healthy food access in neighborhoods that are basically food swamps, where only unhealthy food is available. Educating folks on healthy eating and wellness, even local food procurement, connecting local farmers to the places where food needs to go, and ensuring that all of the policies that are in place, both on the municipality as well as on the state level, are really supportive of health, and really making sure that the healthy choice is easy for everyone, and that folks don't have to go out of their way to support health. And so next slide, please. And so I'd like to invite you to connect with your Rutgers Cooperative Extension department, as I think that is like a great place to start the conversation on food policy councils. And so just for those who don't know, Rutgers Cooperative Extension is the outreach arm of Rutgers University. There's 21 offices of Rutgers Cooperative Extension across the state, so one office per county. And usually it has three main departments: the Family and Community Health Sciences Department, which is my department, 4-H, which is youth development, and Agriculture and Natural Resources, which is the department where you see environmental stewards or master gardener programs. Next slide, please. However, our funding is really unique. And the reason I bring this up is because it creates kind of that long-term vision and that sustainability. And so we're funded by the United States Department of Agriculture's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We're also funded by the New Jersey legislature through the New Jersey Agriculture Experiment Station and local funds. And so, for example, I am a county agent in Passaic County, and so the Passaic County commissioners pay part of my salary. However, it makes me, kind of on the ground in Passaic County, able to work directly with my community, as well as have a national network of cooperative extension agents that I can tap into for support. And so when we're thinking about food policy councils, how they should work, and I would like you to consider thinking about Rutgers Cooperative Extension. So with that, I'd like to ask Mary to introduce Rachel.
Hey everyone, my name is Mary Sellis. I'm the Director of Health Initiatives at the United Way of Passaic County. I facilitate the Passaic County Food Policy Council, of which Sarah Elnickid is just such a strong resource and partner, and you'll hear more about that in a few minutes. It is my real pleasure to introduce Rachel Santo, who is a Senior Research Program Coordinator at the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. In this role, she supports the Food Policy Council Networks project in building the capacity of food policy councils to improve the food system through public policy. She also coordinates research projects related to urban agriculture, institutional food procurement, and the relationship between food and climate change. It has really been an honor to work with Rachel and the Food Policy Network over a number of years, since the Passaic County Food Policy Council is a member of the Food Policy Network and helped us launch almost 10 years ago. I'm grateful for her leadership, her research, and for all of the ways that she and the network have supported the Passaic County Food Policy Council in advancing, deepening, and really strengthening policy systems and environments in Passaic County to make sure that healthy food is affordable and available to all. So thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Mary, for the introduction, and thanks to all of you for inviting me today to give a brief overview of how New Jersey fits into the national context of food policy councils. Next slide, please. So where did food policy councils come from, and why are they such a presence in the US today? As many of you know, there are many intersecting challenges in our food system currently, from an increase in diet-related disease, health disparities, and also increased hunger, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also are facing a problem of farmland loss and urban sprawl, which are connected, and also challenging issues to address: the consolidation of agriculture, and especially the loss of small and mid-sized farmers and other food businesses; other climate change and sustainability concerns that both are impacted by our agricultural practices and also will impact our agricultural practices; and water shortages, especially in the West. And these are just a sample of the many challenges going on in our food system today. Next slide, please. As a result, we've seen a number of different efforts arising at the local level, state, federal level over the past 2 decades or so. You might be familiar with these as part of a broader food movement, but an increased interest in farmers markets and community-supported agriculture, or CSA programs, to support local and regional farmers directly; farmland preservation efforts; food retail strategies, especially to introduce more food options or healthy food options in neighborhoods that don't have as many smaller scale farms, especially in rural, but also peri-urban or even urban agriculture efforts to arise; incentivizing healthy and sustainable food purchasing; and what we'll be talking about mostly today, food policy councils. So all of these are kind of happening at the same time as part of this broader food movement or food movements. And food policy councils are one area where communities have arisen to try to address some of the challenges in their communities. Next slide. So why public policy, and why should food policy councils focus on policy? So this was already briefly introduced earlier, but there are many benefits of programs. They tend to address individual behavior, norms, and can empower communities, especially programs that are led by communities and really work directly at the local level to, I should say, community level or individual level to make changes to improve lives. The benefits of policies and working at the policy level is that you can lift up the efforts at a larger scale. And so you can work across the whole city or across the whole county and improve the environment in which those programs and individual decisions are happening. And so this can help make healthier or better choices more practical, easy, and accessible to all members of a community. And many would argue that these are needed to raise all boats, to lift everyone's boat. And so that's kind of where the impetus for a lot of food policy councils and food policy changes are occurring. As you can see in this graphic here, food policy councils have been increasing steadily, especially since around 2005. And there are a number of reasons that we can get into if you'd like, but in general, I would just say that this is kind of happening as more and more groups learn about other food policy councils in other cities and hearing about what they're doing. There's been kind of a network effect to a certain extent in seeing the benefits happen. I wouldn't read too much into the slight decline over the past few years. Some of this just happens to be because of data lag. So we often find out about groups several years after they started, or they aren't quite ready to enter our directory quite yet. So this is a combination of our online sleuthing about what groups are and aren't active, and also learning directly from those groups when they arise. So I imagine it will be probably pretty level or plateau effect over the next few years. And unless we see a lot more rise, and potentially in New Jersey would be one area where we'd love to see that happen. Next slide. And here you can see the number of food policy councils by each US state. And New Jersey actually falls right at the median, which is 3 per state. Some states like North Carolina, California, Michigan have, as you can see, a lot of food policy councils. And this is in part because there are statewide networks that are set up to support and cultivate the building of new food policy councils. So North Carolina, actually all 3 of those, North Carolina, California, Michigan, Kansas, Minnesota had one for a while, Ohio, Indiana, pretty much the top of the list. Those are all groups or states that have networks intended to build new food policy councils, support the development of new food policy councils. And hopefully from this presentation and conversation today, we might see more in New Jersey because a similar effort is underway. Next slide. In terms of age of food policy councils, this slightly ticks up each year, but we have about 21% that are over 10 years old at this point, another 42% that are 6 to 10 years old, 28% that are 3 to 5 years old, and about 10% that are less than 2 years old. And one thing to note is that the rise of food policy councils that you saw shows just those that are active at each time during the year. We know of about 100 plus additional councils that have dissolved over time. And in some cases, it's because the community decided they didn't need the group anymore. But in a lot of times, food policy councils are challenging to manage, in the sense that many of them are mostly volunteer run, and the status, the fluctuation of where they're housed. And sometimes, they might be grassroots groups and don't have the ability to get funding, or as we'll learn, some are nonprofits, but that comes with its own challenges. So part of the rise and also leveling off of food policy councils can also come from the fact that some of them have dissolved over time. Next slide. In terms of geographic focus, over a third of councils are focused at the county level, and another 20% are focused at both the city and county level, and 12% are focused only at the city level. So overall, about 2/3 of councils are focused in some way, shape, or form at a local government level. And I shouldn't say government, but the local jurisdictional level. And then 20% or so are at the regional level, and this can be multi-county or multi-state, though we generally see most of them are multi-county. And they might find that collaborating across county boundaries has many benefits, especially in areas that are more rural, or that want to spread their resources wider. That they can bring together people and voices from different counties to collaborate on the broader regional scope of their geographic area. And 11% are focused at the state or territorial level, and 2% are embedded within sovereign tribal nations. Next slide. In terms of organizational structure, slightly over a third of councils are housed within nonprofits, and this includes having a fiscal sponsor as the organizational entity that performs administrative tasks, and also that allows the council to receive funding. Some groups eventually evolve to become their own independent nonprofit. That's about 15% of councils. And then we also have 25% of councils that are embedded within government. And this may be, they're within a government agency, most commonly public health, but sometimes they're within planning or sustainability department. They might also have a government staff member to support the council when they're embedded within government. Another 21% are grassroots, 21% are grassroots coalitions. And this is our generic term for unincorporated groups that are just mostly people coming together to work on food systems issues, but don't actually have a formal organizational structure in the sense of administratively how they function. And then there are 5% that are embedded within universities, including cooperative extension. Next slide. Even if a group isn't embedded within government, they often have different relationships to government. And as you can see, it's most common for government employees to participate in a food policy council, and then less common, but still relatively common, for the government to support the food policy council in some way, often through financial support or in-kind donations. Food policy councils will often meet in government buildings, or they'll receive some type of government staff support to operate part of their council operations. And I don't need to go through everything other than to say some groups are actually created by legislation or have members that are appointed by government officials. And those aren't even exclusive to groups embedded within government. There actually are some that were created by legislation, but intended to be independent entities separate from government. So there are a lot of different ways you can be connected to government, but we do find overall that having some form of a connection to government can help advance the work of your council, even if it's not a formal embedded within government. Just having some relationship to your local government staff or elected officials can be beneficial for your efforts. Next slide. In terms of who sits on food policy councils, so food policy councils are incredibly diverse, both at an individual or city or community level, but also as a whole. It's really hard to say, there's one standard form of a food policy council, because as you could tell, the geographic focuses or foci differ, the organizational structures differ, and also who sits on food policy councils differs. And that's in part because each community has its own needs and its own desire to represent different voices. On the whole, though, community members are the most common. Community members and anti-hunger or emergency food representatives are on about over 90% of councils in some way, shape, or form. And food producers and public health staff are also relatively common. And then you can see there are a whole other number of different food system sector representatives that may be present on your council. I will note that we have seen some increased effort to incorporate the voices of youth on councils, and also there's been increased attention to not just having community representatives, but having representatives of people who are experiencing or have experienced many of the issues that food policy councils are working on. And we can talk about that a little bit more when we get into the racial equity discussion. Next slide. In terms of budgets. One of the biggest challenges that we hear from food policy councils, and it's been an ongoing challenge since our network started, is that it's really hard to get funding for food policy groups. As you can see, about a third of councils have no funding whatsoever, and another third get less than $10,000 in funding. So overall, 2/3 of councils have less than $10,000 in their budgets. This makes it really challenging to do many of the efforts that councils are working on. And it also speaks, I think, volumes to the effect that how much they're able to get done with such relatively small budgets. And, it leads me to wonder, what would we be able to accomplish if there were really concerted funding to support food policy councils, especially to support the actual networking and the coordination of food policy councils. When they do get funding, it tends to be for specific programs or projects, and it's much harder to get funding for the actual long-term staff support that's needed to sustain the council's operations over time. Next slide. What do councils work on? So this was already discussed to a certain extent, and I'll just highlight that we asked councils over the years, what are the issues that you're prioritizing in your efforts? And healthy food access has always been number one. It's been number one for the last 5 or 6 years that we've done this survey. Interestingly, some of the other policy priorities we have suggested amongst a list have kind of oscillated over time, and sometimes it depends on the context of the national discussions. There was a period of time when food waste and reduction and recovery was a really hot topic. But right now, obviously, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, focuses on anti-hunger and anti-poverty efforts have been obviously elevated significantly. Also, support for food producers during these times has been increased, and also transportation and distribution logistics. And even though food labor is relatively low on this list, it has actually increased significantly compared to previous years. At one point in time, we had, I think, 1 to 2% of councils were saying they had any efforts focused on food labor. They were prioritizing food labor. Now about 6% of councils say it's within their top 3 priorities. And overall, apart from just their priorities, another 30% overall have worked on some form of food labor policy efforts. So we're seeing increased attention to this area. And I think it highlights, some of the efforts underway during the pandemic have really elevated the challenges that food workers are facing, especially food processing workers and food retail workers. And so a lot of groups have pivoted to addressing these concerns. Next slide. Now I'm just going to go through a few examples of, how does this data actually look like in practice? And so these are just anecdotes from one of many tasks that many of these food policy groups are working on, or food policy councils are working on. And then I'll start with a few from COVID, but then I'll also give you some examples from before COVID and, during relatively normal times. The New Orleans Food Policy Advisory Committee successfully advocated during the pandemic to allow the statewide pandemic EBT program to be changed to not include Social Security numbers, and extended the application date to make the program more accessible to people facing food insecurity. Next slide. The Arizona Food System Network worked with the governor's office to allocate the COVID relief funding to SNAP fruit and vegetable incentive programs, and also to emergency food providers. Next slide. The city of Lynn in Massachusetts, the Food Security Task Force worked with the city to craft guidelines to have socially distanced farmers markets open last summer. We saw this was a common trend. A lot of food policy groups worked to make sure that their farmers markets were able to stay open during the pandemic. Next slide. Beyond pandemic times, but continuing to today, the Greater Kansas City Food Policy Coalition has been working to advocate for reducing the state sales tax on food compared to its neighbor states. It has one of the highest sales tax rates on foods. They had this really innovative campaign highlighting, with postcards that they were sending to their legislators about, look at how much higher our sales tax is, 6.5% compared to Colorado, which was at 0%, and how this could really influence food security in their state. Next slide. And in Worcester, Massachusetts, something of interest, and this is one of the few groups that was really prioritizing labor issues earlier on, but they were working on anti-hunger and food pantry initiatives already, and they noticed that, a quarter of their clients were already working, and that many of the people who are participating in their local food systems activities had more economic resources. And so they started really questioning, what can they do to raise the boat and make sure that people who are working don't need to be relying on food pantries, and what does this really come down to? And they decided to partner with Raise Up Massachusetts, which was a minimum wage campaign to support raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, and also to provide paid family and medical leave. And they participated in lobbying, public action, collecting signatures for ballot initiatives, and hosting community forums on this issue. And luckily, or not even luckily, but they were successful in their initiative. And in 2018, the law passed both to support raising the minimum wage and to provide that medical leave, family medical leave. And I'll just mention this as an example of, the Food Policy Council doesn't have to innovate all of the campaigns on its own. In fact, much of the strength of food policy councils comes from partnerships and collaboration with other efforts. And so in this case, the Food Policy Council didn't need to lead the minimum wage efforts, but they found that supporting it would ultimately support their overall goals for increasing food access, reducing hunger, and improving the food system at large. Next slide. And I'll also mention that there has been increased attention to racial and social equity within the structures, decision-making of food policy councils. Prior to last summer and the broader national reckoning with structural and systemic racism, there were a number of groups that were already working to improve racial equity in their councils' intentions and their structure, but we've really seen an elevated increase over the last year and a half. About 38% of councils say that they already have a racial or social equity framework that they use to make decisions about both their internal practices and the policy work that they work on. And another 43% are now developing such a framework. Next slide. And I'll mention that the ways that councils are engaging to improve equity and have more inclusive engagement varies dramatically across groups. In some cases, it's focused really on the internal shifting of values, principles, and motivations. And so this can entail race and equity training for the council members themselves. In other cases, they're working to change internal behaviors and processes, such as building leadership and increasing membership from more diverse groups, especially from those who have traditionally been excluded from the food policy making process, and prioritizing those voices in their decision making. There've also been external programs and policies in place to improve food system inequities. And in some cases, it's just hosting events or discussions within the community at large to increase awareness about why these issues matter, or to really focus on the intention of the policy outcomes and how they're going to improve equity in different ways. And I'll give a few examples of these, and then if you have questions, we can go through those during the Q&A. In Los Angeles, the Food Policy Council created the LA Food Leaders Lab, which is an initiative that trains community advocates and residents on food justice. And there's a really deep concentration on political leadership and strategies for building more healthier and more resilient food systems. They do this in through a 10-week intergenerational and multilingual course. And it's really a leadership development initiative as part of the council. Next slide. The Baltimore Food Policy Initiative has a different way of engaging residents through their Resident Food Equity Advisor program. And this is a program that was developed because the Baltimore Food Policy Initiative already had a food policy council-like entity called the Food PAC. And they found that the Food PAC tended to mostly be representatives of professional organizations, tended to be largely white, and wasn't necessarily reflective of the voices of actual residents experiencing food insecurity or other challenges on the ground. And so instead of trying to meld those two worlds, they decided to create a separate task force of advisors that were representatives from all the city council districts, and with the explicit goal of having those residents reflect the racial and socioeconomic diversity of the city. And they are organized into cohorts each year, and the goal is to advise the food policy initiative's work on different issues. And they have been different years, different cohorts have been selecting specific topics to work on. So one year they worked on healthy corner stores. Another year they were working on housing and public housing. So that it really varies depending on the cohort and what that cohort is interested in addressing that year. And the program has been so successful, it's actually replicated in the city's housing department. And there are a lot of other cities now that are also engaging in some form of food equity advisor bodies or are thinking about forming something similar. Next slide.
Yes, and Rachel, I'm being mindful of the time, making sure we have enough time for Q&A.
Yep, almost done. I'll just say the Pioneer Valley Grows working group was developed to investigate and address systemic racism and inequities in the food system. And they organize public workshops and discussions around the topics, including a forum on immigration, food access, and land access. So just showing that there's a broad way that groups are engaging these issues from both their individual council members level all the way up to having public discussions around the topics. Next slide. And I'll just finish by saying, if you're interested in learning more about the Food Policy Networks project, we have a national listserv that you can join. It's open to anyone. You don't have to be an official member of a food policy council, but you can learn a lot from others who are. We have a directory of food policy councils. So if and when you do form, you can ask us to be added to the directory. We'll have you fill out a survey, and we use that data to create presentations like this and inform our work across the year. And I'll also say we have a number of other resources, next slide, that if you're interested in learning more, you can use, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, we have this interactive dashboard now that you can go to. And if you want to learn about different councils and you want to say, I want to learn more about councils embedded within government, so you can filter by that, or I want to learn more about councils that have paid staff positions, or I want to learn more about councils that are focused on specific topic areas. You can filter and learn more by clicking around. So just encourage you to check that out. And then the last slide is other relevant resources to read and learn more, including Doing Food Policy Council's Right Guide, which is really the go-to manual on starting a food policy council. We're actually in the process of updating this, but it probably will be several more months before that's available. If you join a listserv though, you'll learn more about the update when it's ready. And I think that's all. I'm happy to take questions and answer anything you.
Rachel, thank you so much. I can't stress enough for those folks who joined a little bit late and didn't hear my introduction, just how much the Food Policy Network at Johns Hopkins University has been so integral for us launching the Food Democracy Collaborative. And I was so excited when we got to be included in the national directory as one of the handful of state food policy councils, and just so grateful for all the resources. And the Doing Food Policy Council's Right Guide is well loved, always near my nightstand, a lot of dog ears, a lot of highlighting. I have students look at it as well in the food systems class, and I'm glad to hear it's being updated, but it's already so useful. So thanks for that fantastic presentation. We're gonna sort of keep the Q&A for Rachel brief, and then we can do a broader, Q&A for Rachel and the panelists after the panel conversation of New Jersey Food Policy Council members. But right now, if you have a burning question or two for Rachel, if you could just put it in the chat and I'll read, I'll pick out one or two to ask. We have until about 2:18. We can push it, I think, for Q&A. So go ahead and put your questions in the chat. I've been jotting down questions. We're a newly forming Food Policy Council. That's, so I have lots of questions for you, but I certainly don't want to take time away from participants. So I'll ask also my co-moderators if they have any questions that they want to put into the chat. It's interesting and to see that we're not the only ones that, of course, being just almost a year old, still very young, that, there are lots of food policy councils, almost a quarter, right, that are not funded, don't have paid staff, and don't have like a hierarchical structure, right? They're just remaining sort of grassroots and nebulous. Okay, so the first question is, what does it mean to do food policy councils right? It sounds like there are many models and missions out there. Yeah, the guide is so good. But go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, we don't love the name. This was created about 10 years ago, not actually by our team, but one of our team members was involved with it. So the name will be changing in our new update. And so I wouldn't read too much into it other than that it was attempting to be a catchy title at the time.
Good question. And so we have another question. Any departing words of wisdom for New Jersey councils? That's a great question, Marco. Yeah, so we're one of the states, which is why we're having this event, right? So we're a state without a lot of action going on. So lessons learned for new food policy councils?
This is a great question. I don't have the perfect answer already prepared, but I would say just off the top of my head that I think it's important to recognize you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and that there's a lot you can learn from other groups that have been around. And so you already have, a wealth of abundance that we're going to talk to some of the groups who have been here for several years, or 10 years in the case of Passaic County. So learn from your neighbors, learn from other groups around, learn what they're interested in, what policy priorities have really been resonant in their communities. We do find the other big thing I would say is don't get too attached to one way of being, because a lot of groups evolve over time. And so there are groups that, started out being embedded in government and then transition to deciding to be their own nonprofit, or vice versa. And so a lot of groups spend a lot of time at the beginning focused on trying to set up the perfect organizational structure that they think is going to work forever. And then it turns out that, things shift, the funding shift, the priorities shift, the members shift. And obviously when members shift, the conversations are naturally going to change. And so these are kind of, in some ways, like they're always kind of nebulous entities. And that's the value of a network, is it can be resilient, responsive to different community concerns. And I think that's a value of these networks, is that they can be more transitory, so to speak, than other traditional nonprofit organizations. So use that to your advantage, and make sure that you don't spend too much time focused on that initial organizing piece.
That's a really helpful, and it's a great segue question, Marco, because we're going to learn from the two other food policy councils in New Jersey in a moment. I do have a question about, some of the food policy councils do more advocacy than others, lobbying or specific campaigns around policy change. You mentioned the one about wages in, I can't recall which state, but I'm wondering if you could speak briefly to when a food policy council is more aligned or more focused on that sort of advocacy type work. How does that impact the membership makeup, or really, involvement or connection to different levels of government, et cetera?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. So one thing we do know is that most of the groups, the most common way of advocacy, common level of advocacy is at the local level. And then I think about 60%, 66% or so of groups are working on local level advocacy in some way, shape, or form. And we use this term very broadly. So not specifically lobbying, but the broader, they could be raising awareness about an issue that would influence policy eventually, but might not actually be directly lobbying for a specific policy. So a handful of groups also work on state policy or federal policy, but definitely not as much as the local level. And I think one challenge some groups have run into is, depending on their organizational structure, they might be worried about the extent to which they can engage in advocacy or lobbying. So if your group is really excited about advocating, especially lobbying on particular legislation, it would be important to consider that when designing your structure. Obviously, groups that are embedded in government are going to be more limited in or really very limited in their ability to specifically lobby on different policies. And also nonprofits have, regulations around the type of lobbying you can do and how much of it you can do. Whereas if you're a grassroots group, you could spend more effort there. Even within the council, there are also certain members who might not feel comfortable advocating or lobbying or even advocating on specific issues, especially if they're government staff. It doesn't mean that they can't do it in their personal capacity in some cases, but just recognizing that depending on the extent to which you plan to do it and the types of advocacy or lobbying work that can influence your council. We actually have a really specific guide that walks you through what you can and can't do with different organizational structures. And so I'm happy to share that in the chat.
Yeah, that would be extremely helpful. There's a follow-up question related to that. Following up on Janine's question of the nonprofit food policy councils, what were grassroots, I guess, what proportion are 501c3s and what proportion are 501c4s? Renata is someone who's been participating in our network facilitation team as we try to figure out our structure. And we're actually, in the throes of this conversation right now about structure and advocacy. And it's interesting that you say, someone who maybe can't do advocacy in their professional work can certainly be part of a state or local or regional food policy council and engage in some level of advocacy personally, but they would have to sort of check and make that decision on their own. And we're actually meeting with the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative next week to try to engage in some conversations about how they're doing it. But just to Renata's question about the proportion that are 501c3 versus 501c4.
It's a great question. As far as I know of the nonprofit groups we have, none of them currently are 501c4s. We were looking into that at some point. And as far as we know, nobody has officially gone that direction, though I think there was one group that was considering it for a time on our listserv, and I don't know if they decided to or not. But yeah, the broader question about your staff role, it really depends on the government or the organization that you're officially employed by, and the rules and regulations around that. So definitely check into that if you're interested. But I do know that there are some who, will engage at their personal level, or even, will be part of the Food Policy Council, but won't sign on to specific lobbying efforts that the council is taking on. So it really depends on your level of familiarity and comfort with your limitations or restrictions in your current job, and also the way that the Food Policy Council signs on to different efforts.
Great. Well, you have, I guess, provided, is there one more slide where you have an email address, or do you want to just put that in the chat in case folks
I'll
have
put that
any
in the
other?
chat. I think I forgot to.
The link for the listserv is here. We're going to be sharing those slides along with the recording. So you'll be able to tap into that and connect with that listserv and to Rachel and the website. And there's just lots of great resources on the website. So thank you so much. And I'll stick around for a little bit, maybe to hear some, about New Jersey Council.
Definitely.
That's great.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah Elnikib to introduce our New Jersey, our panel of folks from the 2 New Jersey Food Policy Councils. And she will introduce those folks. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, for that kind of national perspective. I think it really helps us consider, what works and what doesn't. And of course, New Jersey is a very unique place. And so we want to see what has worked and didn't in New Jersey. And so we have the privilege of having 2 New Jersey food policy councils. One is at the county level and the other is at the city level. So it'll be a really interesting kind of comparison to think about what would work for your kind of area. And so Mary Sellis is the Director of Health Initiatives at the United Way of Passaic County, and I have the privilege of working with her in the Passaic County Food Policy Council. And so she will start us off, and then we have Manny Casedra, who is the Director of Community Health at New Brunswick Tomorrow, and he chairs the current New Brunswick Community Food Alliance. And so we'll hear a little bit about his experience in New Brunswick.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It really is my pleasure to present on behalf of the Passaic County Food Policy Council, which is a cross-sector coalition of more than 75 stakeholders that are working to end hunger by addressing the root causes of food insecurity in Passaic County. The council brings together partners from across the food system, advocates for policies that make healthy food more affordable, accessible, and available to Passaic County residents. As you can see on the map, we serve Passaic County, which is located in northern New Jersey and has a population of approximately 500,000 people. Its county seat is the city of Patterson. Its demographics are diverse. And since we are an equity-focused coalition, much of our work focuses on southern Passaic County, where we see the highest rates of poverty, food insecurity, and health disparities. Our coalition has a rich history. We began conversations with emergency food partners and others to address what are the root causes of hunger. And in that process, we applied for and were awarded a USDA Hunger-Free Communities Planning Grant. As a part of that initiative, we conducted a countywide food assessment of food insecurity in 2012 called Where's the Food? And created an action plan to address hunger called the PUSH Report. And through that process, we formed the Passaic County Food Policy Council, which was going to be tasked with implementing that plan. Many of the recommendations in the PUSH Report have been expanded and successfully implemented. With equity in mind, we've continued to conduct local food assessments, like the food environment assessment in Patterson's first ward, which really did an analysis of corner stores and transportation to food access points. In 2016, we were awarded a multi-year grant through the New Jersey Health Initiatives, which is a grant-making program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, to create a new strategic plan, which also included an assessment of health disparities and emphasis on broader social determinants of health. And we called this plan Building a Culture of Health, Blueprint for Action which continues to guide our work today. And we're working on revising and updating that plan. We're in the process. Next slide. Our coalition structure is based on the collective impact model, and we use a collaborative governance model. The United Way functions as the backbone organization to convene the coalition, coordinate activities, and mobilize funding for implementation. We have a strong leadership team that works to provide strategic direction and accountability to the work, and we utilize a shared leadership model and work to come to consensus when making decisions. We are very, very excited to have recently launched our Passaic County Resident Advisory Board, which we modeled off of some of the Food Policy Network other national models like Baltimore, which is really resident-led, and the residents provide strategic direction, make recommendations on implementation, and provide feedback about how to do our work better. We believe that residents should be leading the work and really are the best advocates for their own communities. We have a number of working groups that are chaired by experts in their fields who lead the implementation of strategies in collaboration with Food Policy Council members. We also provide ongoing capacity building and trainings for our membership to advance best practices. As funds are available, the United Way releases requests for proposals to advance our policy system and environmental change strategies, and Food Policy Council members collaborate regularly to apply for funding together. Next slide. So I could spend like a whole presentation just on our working groups. Really, our working group chairs are superstars and leaders and experts in their own right. So I'm going to give them just a huge shout out and thank you in advance. And I hope that I can be succinct and really in just a few minutes share some of the successes that these groups have worked towards. The local food procurement working group is led by Rachel Terry of the Common Market, which is based out of Philadelphia, and really seeks to increase institutional purchasing from local farms. During COVID-19, we really were able to purchase and distribute fresh farm produce boxes and really targeted the senior population. And we're working on farm to institution strategies, specifically right now with school districts in mind. We've worked with Patterson Public Schools to support purchasing for the local, from local farms to the fresh fruit and vegetable program, and are going to continue to build up on that success in the future. The SNAP Outreach and Enrollment Working Group is led by Megan Goslink of the Community Food Bank of New Jersey. We work with partners to educate, and she really leads this work to educate organizations regarding the importance of SNAP and policy and regulation changes that are made. We promote this program heavily as we believe it's the first line of defense against hunger, and also the SNAP outreach and enrollment activities in the community, and work to overcome barriers to SNAP enrollment. The Healthy Corner Store Working Group is led by Jessica Ellison of the Community Food Bank of New Jersey and Sarah El-Nakib of Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Over the course of the years doing this work, we've implemented about 5 to 6 healthy corner stores in Passaic City and successfully advocated for the passage of the food staple ordinance in Passaic City. In Patterson, we're working on implementing the Healthy Corner Store campaign in the 4 to 5 corner stores based on the food environment assessments that we had previously done. And I should mention that that was also in collaboration with Food Trust. The Federal Meal Programs Working Group is led by Lisa Pitts of Hunger Free New Jersey. As a coalition, she's really led our work to successfully advocate with many, many partners for the implementation of Breakfast After the Bell, improved local food procurement, which I mentioned. We've conducted outreach, particularly during COVID-19, around pandemic EBT, and the expansion of the summer meals programs. We work closely with school districts, and I would particularly like to acknowledge David Buchholz the Executive Director of Food Service for Patterson Public Schools, for his partnership and just ongoing efforts. He's really been a champion of this work. The Trauma-Informed Food Access Working Group is led by Rose Bakes of Kumac. Kumac is really our trusted emergency food and food access leader in Passaic County. And we work with, they work with us and the coalition to improve systems and practices of food pantry providers to be more trauma informed and meet the needs of the whole person. And I want to acknowledge the work of the Community Food Bank of New Jersey as well, that's provided resources to local pantries in Passaic County to make some of these improvements. Our Community Gardens Working Group is led by Patterson Habitat for Humanity in strong collaboration with City Green. Patterson Habitat for Humanity is really a strong leader in some of our most challenged neighborhoods in Patterson, and has really developed strong resident leadership, and of course builds affordable housing and promotes home ownership. But they're leading a number of community garden initiatives in Patterson, and really I just give the resident leadership so much credit. There's a strong group of resident leaders on this working group. And City Green has also been a strong collaborator because they are our local urban agriculture and really work to build, educate, and support community gardens across the county. We also work with them as a coalition to promote the farmers markets and SNAP incentives that City Green manages. And again, I just want to take this opportunity to thank all of our working group chairs for their leadership, their dedication, their energy, their commitment. They've really been champions, and many of them have been with us in this leadership role for a number of years. And really our coalition has remained strong because of the commitment and the tireless efforts of our partners. We really are a member-driven organization. So when I speak on behalf of the coalition, know that there's, a large company of people behind me, and just give them so much credit. And another word on COVID-19, just that those relationships that we formed really over the past 10 years enabled us to do, pivot like many. And we worked with partners to connect organizations to emergency food resources, provided education to members regarding food policy and changes. Also, in addition to funding opportunities, we worked to coordinate information and outreach efforts and mobilize funding to support healthy emergency food. And again, just want to say the importance of trust and relationships in this work, that we were able to work together successfully because of that. So again, thank you to my partners. Next slide. And here's a list of, some of our publications that could be resources. Really, the Food Policy Council, we are a learning community, and we seek to share our lessons learned and gain insight from other communities. I really welcome conversations across communities and would be happy to, facilitate or have conversations with others and other communities regarding food policy councils. Thank you for the opportunity to share about the work of the Passaic County Food Policy Council.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that overview of the Passaic County Food Policy Council. That's great. So next we have Manny Cassandra from New Brunswick Tomorrow, and he will present the presentation, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So prep your questions for Mary and Manny, and they'll be joined by Kara Cute, who is the Rutgers Cooperative Extension specialist who works in as part of the New Brunswick Community Food Alliance. So Manny, take it away.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Manuel Castañeda. I was a stated director of community health at New Brunswick Tomorrow. New Brunswick Tomorrow, I like to call us a social impact organization. I feel nonprofit is too ambiguous, with a mission to improve the quality of life of New Brunswick residents. So we are hyper-focused in New Brunswick. But within my respective role at the New Brunswick Community Food Alliance, I'm actually the chair based on being a resident of New Brunswick and not necessarily my affiliation with my organization. And I place emphasis on that because from the beginning, the New Brunswick Community Food Alliance really wanted to emphasize community and making sure that residents were a significant and integral part of the network moving forward. And it started that way. We've had difficulties, retaining residents throughout our time, and obviously the pandemic, even though we look to re-engage community residents during at least my tenure as chair, ran into obviously the issue called COVID-19, where it became very difficult to interact and engage with residents around these particular issues. But overall, our mission, our vision rather, through the Alliance has been so that New Brunswick itself becomes a place where food is affordable, healthy, accessible, and culturally appropriate for all residents. Just a bit about New Brunswick, New Jersey. We are in Middlesex County, so Central Jersey, it is a thing. The governor recognized Central Jersey, so we don't have to fight about that anymore. And New Brunswick is the county seat, and being the hub city, being one of our monikers, that's kind of where we are. We are generally, or been historically rather, a port of entry town, so home to many immigrant populations from the Hungarian migration in the 50s, Puerto Rican migration in the 70s, moving on to the Dominican migration in the 200s, and now seeing a lot of immigrants from Mexico and Central America calling New Brunswick home. And as I stated, we, through the years, at least for my tenure, look to really hyper-focus on community engagement, accessibility of healthier food, and affordability of healthier food to both meet the level of capacity that we had as a completely volunteer network. So, basically falling on the capacity of volunteers and, looking to see how we can affect the food system overall. Next slide, please. And so just a kind of a bit of a timeline in terms of the work that the New Brunswick Community Food Alliance has done. A lot of the planning, 2010, about 2 years before the formal launch in 2012. We've had different types, and I'll kind of group them into groups of initiatives and programs that have happened throughout the years. In the policy realm, which, although we call ourselves a food policy council, I would say that's probably the area that we lack in the most and needed the most maturing in, is actually getting into policy work. We focus mostly on system change, particularly here in New Brunswick, to try to change the food system to make it better in the areas that I mentioned in the previous slide. And so with that in mind, some, but not all of the major successes have been the Hub City Fresh Corner Store Initiative. In fact, I know Nurgul Fitzgerald is on the call, so she led those efforts and has led our healthy food access work group pretty much throughout the history of the Alliance. We have breakfast after the bell, both helping implement that in our schools, as well as getting a report to see how we were doing and how we can look to better that. And that's a lot of work that Kara has done. We've done talking back about community engagement, have had various yearly food forums where we come together as a community, really to open ourselves up to the community and explain to them the importance of food security, and for them to be part of that. I would say those were starting to really pick up a lot of steam until unfortunately the pandemic forced us to stop having them. And we've also had in 2016, 2017, the food assessment that was completed and strategic planning, trying to move us forward. And other projects of note are the Mercado Esperanza launch, where we assisted organizations like New Brunswick Tomorrow, like Elijah's Promise, in helping economic development of food entrepreneurs, local food entrepreneurs here in the city. Next slide, please. And so our structure, like I said, there you go, thank you. All volunteer, with Elijah's Promise being our backbone fiscal organization, fiscal agent. They were getting funding through Johnson & Johnson in order to provide funding to do a lot of the operations for the Alliance. But again, mainly a lot of the efforts that were done through the Alliance were done in kind by the organizations there. And I should stop to say that, in addition to community members, we've had various community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, private organizations like Johnson & Johnson, academic organizations, Rutgers, with its various departments and groups, really be integral partners here. And you'll see that a bit more in a slide that I have later, kind of showing at least the support that the Alliance has had through the years. We have elected executive positions, of which I am the chair. We have a vice chair, secretary, and then we have our elected work group chairs that really do a lot of the grunt of the work in those particular areas. But again, stressing really here, a lot of the work and a lot of the progress that we've made have been on the backs of volunteers. Next slide. And so our work groups consist of 5 work groups. Our agriculture and governance work group. I know Lauren Erickson is on the call as well, so I want to give her a shout out. Not only does she manage the New Brunswick Community Farmers Market, but also has chaired for quite some time our ag work group, looking to increase more fresh food grown here, or at least available to our community. We again that focus on community engagement. So we have a community engagement and marketing group looking to make sure that we incorporated and had community as part of the process and part of the work. Our advocacy and policy group, that I would say out of all of our groups, probably the one that needed a little more support and funding to kind of really push forward a lot of the stuff, but a lot of great stuff happening there. At least there was reports on things such as the amount of sugar in school meals, which we'll be taking now and actually have been working towards creating policy recommendations for the new school contract of the New Brunswick school system. So more to come on that. Our food and economic development work group that look to help and assist Elijah's Promise, New Brunswick Tomorrow, and Collab Arts through the Esperanza Neighborhood Project. And then again, the Healthy Food Access group that really concentrated mostly on the corner store healthy initiatives. Next slide, please. And so none of this could be done, and I think one of our greater successes in New Brunswick is the fact that we can leverage some real great partnerships here, just with the various entities that we have, both public, private, that have already learned to work together. And through our network, at Healthier New Brunswick, I'd like to say that we were practicing collective impact before collective impact was a term. And so this really led to the birth of such things like the Alliance moving forward. Definitely, looking, and happy to have organizations like Johnson & Johnson in our backyard that helps kind of move this work forward. Elijah's Promise, which I would say is the premier organization really focused on health, food security here in the city. Live Well, Be New Brunswick, that serves as the communications platform for Healthier New Brunswick, Rutgers and all its great work, New Brunswick Tomorrow that has been there from the start, and many other organizations, as well as the city, that have partaken to see the efforts that the Food Alliance has done out to fruition. Next slide. And so just for us, a couple of resources. We have our website and Facebook. A lot of our work right now, especially during the pandemic, is informing people of emergency food service opportunities and services and resources. We have a decentralized food pantry system here. And so we take charge of making sure that people are aware of when they can go for food assistance. Obviously, prior to the pandemic, food insecurity was an issue. We know that through our New Brunswick 2016 community survey, 39% of residents reported being food insecure prior to the pandemic. And what we define that as people that didn't, where they bought food and it didn't last as, the week, right? So they needed to rebuy. And so the pandemic has only, compounded that issue. We had two smaller community surveys done during the pandemic, and food insecurity was top 3 of issues, faced by our residents. And so I want to commend all of our volunteers, all of the work that everybody's done through the Alliance, outside of the Alliance, around food insecurity here in the city, and that they continue to do so as we move forward. And again, just if you wanted to see food assessment plan that happened in 2017, there's a hyperlink to that, as well as the breakfast after the bell report. And thank you for your time. I'm looking forward to taking questions.
Thank you so much, Manny. That was an excellent overview of the New Brunswick Community Food Alliance. So if I can invite Mary, Manny, and Kara to come on stage. And then if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat. So we have one question that's specific to Manny from Daryl, that's asking about how do you overcome the difficulty of losing resident participation. I think this gets to the heart of a lot of the challenges that you were mentioning, Manny. So go ahead.
So prior to the pandemic, we started to really just make sure that we were engaged, trying to create focus groups. We have created focus groups around, resident perception around food at the schools, kind of trying to structure it a bit more to see if we can get something concrete to get them on board. Obviously, for our food forums and creating activities and events that would bring out the community. But unfortunately, COVID hit, right? And that has been a struggle and a hurdle that we haven't necessarily been able to overcome, at least with respects to the Alliance, in getting that community participation that we need, being that everything is virtual. So, we're still doing the best we can. I think community engagement wide overall, even beyond our work through the Alliance, relying right now on virtual modes to get in touch with people and stay connected. But once I get the answer, or once we get the answers, be sure that we'll let you know. But it's always going to be a work in progress when it comes to the community. It's about building that trust, and unless you have those opportunities to build that trust, it just becomes all the more difficult.
Yeah, and I would just weigh in also that on a smaller scale, Lauren Erickson led a grant that is funded by the USDA, where we have what we call market ambassadors that are connecting community residents to the farmers market, and we have been able to hire community residents. So it's been really successful in terms of sort of deepening the connection and getting more involvement from people in the community, but it's really just specific to the market, and we need to expand it. And some of the things that Rachel mentioned in particular seem like really great models of ways that we could expand it beyond just the farmers market and into the wider Food Alliance.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. And thank you for that question, Daryl. Daryl's actually leading is one of our resident leaders and has worked with us in the Food Policy Council. And so that's a conversation that we're having internally. But one of the things with equity, and particularly racial equity in mind, that we've been wrestling with and thinking about for a long time is we have done quite a bit of resident engagement through surveys and focus groups and listening sessions and town halls. And there's some community fatigue around those types of activities. And also we have this dynamic of we're paid professionals working in a role and asking residents to volunteer their time. And many of our organizational partners are residents. But when we think about the word volunteer, particularly in this moment of COVID and the economic instability that many face, we really made a concerted effort in our resident advisory board that we would reimburse resident advisory board members for their time, and that we would look at living wages, and that we would honor people's time economically. And that for me, I think is part of what we need to be doing for the future when we think about engaging residents and really push for equity, because it's not, in my opinion, I'll say this speaking for myself, I am concerned with residents being asked to volunteer by paid professionals. And so that's one thing that I'll just add.
Thank you, Mary. That's very important to consider when we're talking about equity and community involvement. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up. All right, excellent. What other questions do folks have? Okay. One question was for Manny. What kind of assistance were offered for food entrepreneurs? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that project.
Sure, through the Esperanza Esperanza. Sometimes I get it confused in my head when I'm thinking English, Spanish, English. Is like I said, a program that was through Elijah's Promise, New Brunswick and Collab Arts to provide local entrepreneurs with training on how to open their own businesses. Elijah's Promise has a commercial kitchen, so they were able to actually work through the commercial kitchen in order to create, a lot of the entrepreneurs being food entrepreneurs, and then providing the space for them to sell their food, right? What they've created. And we have had several Esperanza markets at a local park in the middle of the Esperanza neighborhood, Joyce Kilmer Park, where it almost becomes a bit of a fair. So there's creative placemaking and different other activities, as well as this opportunity for these local food entrepreneurs to sell and learn how to create their businesses and develop their businesses.
And
that was through funding from the President Foundation.
Yeah, and I would add also that, as we're talking about policy level things, there was also a real focus of the policy and advocacy subcommittee, or working group rather, to focus on New Jersey's cottage food laws and allowing people to sell baked goods that are made in residential kitchens. And I haven't been following, but I think maybe someone can say, I think it's now passed. But that was something that our policy group was really was working toward, because it's not just providing the assistance to the individuals, but it's how can we change the policies around the state to help people who want to sell food that they're making in their homes.
Yeah, that's excellent. And we have Jason from Elijah's Promise putting out his email, so please connect with them. They have an amazing program in New Brunswick. Right, excellent. And so we also had a few other questions preset because we knew that, bringing community members to the table, engaging community members is a challenge of food policy councils. Oftentimes we meet in the middle of the day, in conference rooms for, the municipal buildings or nonprofit organizations. And so it becomes challenging if you're, a working parent, to come to these meetings and voice your opinion. And so what are some of the strategies that have been successful, or what are some of the challenges that you faced when really connecting with the community? And this question, Mary, if you don't mind starting, and then we'll hand it over to Manny and Kara.
No, thanks for the question, Sarah. So for our resident advisory board meets in the evening. And, again, I mentioned that there's a stipend for their participation. I think that many, that they were recruited and we marketed the program, and many of them, just come with such expertise and passion. And so I'm really grateful for that. I don't want to say that I think that the stipend is, the primary reason that they're there, but I think, again, for us as a coalition, that was just an important part of being equity focused. And I think that many challenges are just the nature of the barriers that people face, particularly during COVID. And I think the successes, when we've been successful in engaging residents, obviously we're doing all of the things in terms of being culturally appropriate, running meetings in that language, meeting on evenings, weekends, and meeting people obviously in their neighborhood. We're not doing that right now. And I think that word of mouth is a really successful strategy. It's been for us, where actually residents become champions and invite other people that they know, and then build a network that way. And so, you know, I really, our successes have been really a credit to, and I'll acknowledge Daryl, who's on the call today, and some others that are leaders in their community, and they're champions for the work, and they're recruiting, you know, and helping to advance the work. And again, I think that back to just community organizing principles, that the people who are most impacted by the problem are the people who know the most about it, and they're the ones who are least likely to compromise when deals are being made. And it really is like the integral reason of why residents need to be front and center, and not just for the purpose of providing feedback, you know, not just to be surveyed, but to really be making decisions.
Thank you, Mary.
So, yep, sorry. I wouldn't, you know, echo a lot of what Mary said, and then my previous comments with respect to the first question on the challenges and the successes of bringing community members. The reality is, like I stated, you know, you've got to, I think a lot of this work, and you know, and overall, you've got to meet community where the community is. And, you know, to talk about food security, they might understand it from a personal level, but not necessarily equate it with food insecurity or food security. And I think you have to start at that basic level of making sure that you can get that community buy-in, and that they feel that they're part of the process. And I think if they see that it's too organizational heavy, that could be intimidating for community residents to partake in that type of process. And so making sure that we do create that welcoming environment. To Mary's point, logistically, having meetings when it's more convenient for the residents and not so much convenient for organizations, right? So we're looking at evening hours, weekend hours, looking at creating activities that are welcoming, not only welcoming, but accessible, you know, both through time constraints as well as you know, ability to get there via transportation. And so I always say, in whatever type of work you do, you know, involving the community, it's a constant it's a constant reassurance. It's a constant, or need to be consistent with interacting with the community in order to build that trust, in order to build that relationship and build that bond, so that we can move together as an equal force. As far as other major challenges, at least with our Food Policy Council, so I again want to commend all the major work that everybody has done at the Alliance, again, on a volunteer basis. But that's also been, I think, a challenge, the fact that it's been all volunteer, right? That the Food Alliance itself hasn't had a large pool of resources of its own to pull from in order to get a lot of the work done. It was dependent on volunteers and for the organizations that volunteered on leveraging their resources. So it does become a challenge, to kind of centralize that, get that moving forward as a collective, understanding that all the organizations obviously have their own focuses and mandates that they have to kind of go through. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much, Manny. So Karen asked a really great question about how do policy councils translate to more fresh local food from New Jersey farmers getting into the homes of families facing limited resources, and how is this tracked? So if you guys don't mind talking a little about the New Brunswick Farmers Market local food procurement in Patterson, I think that'll help answer Karen's question.
I just saw Lauren was here. I don't know if she wants to speak up.
Yeah,
Lauren.
I was about to say, let the person who really knows it about it speak to it.
I am here. I am bringing you with me from one room to another. So bear with me so I don't lose audio, or you might hear my dog, who I just had to let back in. But sure, I would be happy to chat about the farmers market, and I can actually turn my camera back on. Okay, to do so. So there we go. So I guess one of the, Kara alluded to one of the really effective things that we've done with the New Brunswick Community Farmers Market, which is through our Market Ambassador program, doing outreach by working with, local residents who've been able to bring on board onto our staff as paid market employees to help us with outreach. And what's been most effective is the network and the collaborations that we've been able to build with other local houses of worship, with other nonprofit organizations, with food service organizations throughout the city. And, I think that's helped us not only promote a lot of the programs that we do have, but to shape new programs as well. And I think, one of the goal of the Market Ambassador program was really to promote New Jersey grown fresh fruits and vegetables, which it does, and which we do. But one of the things that we've kind of learned is that, that alone is not enough. So what's been effective for us has been also talking about that affordability piece together with talking about the types of fruits and vegetables that we have that people are interested in. So we've promoted our affiliation with the Garden State Good Food Network and accepting good food bucks as double SNAP incentives. We've promoted our own matching incentives, which are supported from Johnson & Johnson, that match the value of senior and WIC Farmers Market Nutrition Program vouchers that are provided through the state. So really using the network to kind of get that information out, and then using the same network to bring feedback and information into us has been super helpful.
Right. I would add that, some of the work that we did speaking with community members at various community events and learning about the types of foods that they want, that they're not necessarily finding in the city, and turning around and sharing that. Lauren was able to share that with a lot of New Jersey farmers. So it's actually also affecting kind of what's being grown in the state, so that there's a better match between what our community members want and what our farmers are providing. So it's helped in that way also.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side of that, the extra step of stuff that was produced and out there that our community wasn't aware of, creating those educational recipes so that people were aware, those taste testing, hey, try this, right? This is what you can do with this. This could be a substitute for that. So not only also being culturally appropriate, but also extending beyond and making sure that we could all embrace different types of foods and be respectful on both sides of that.
Yeah.
And I think in Passaic County, we would echo many of those strategies. We are very, very fortunate to have City Green housed in Passaic County. Their main site is in Clifton, New Jersey, and they really manage the good food bucks. I know it's called different things in different places, but those are the double value coupons at farmers markets, and really are experts in working with the local farms in the area to source those farmers markets. Additionally, we've really worked with the Common Market, which is a nonprofit wholesale mission focused distributor. They're based out of Philadelphia, but they've really been our go-to when we have questions about how do we help institutions improve their bidding processes and their language in contracts. That is the financial piece of and the regulatory piece around local food procurement is a heavy lift. It's complicated, and I think having experts in that who have that expertise in that field, and then really being willing to work with the institutions and meet them where they are with all of the regulatory and price restrictions, and say, how can we incrementally make a small change, right? A system change. It's not going to be, pulling a lever and everything's going to change at once. But we were able to see just even leveraging the fresh fruit and vegetable federal dollars in school districts and to really purchase locally during the fall and during the spring of 2021. I mean, I think that helped open doors to think about other types of purchasing because it was so successful. And again, I would echo all of the nutrition education and the thinking about culturally appropriate things like cooking demonstrations and garden education. All of that is really important, for communities to embrace local food, which may be unfamiliar to them, especially in a place like Patterson, that it's very large immigrant population. And so some people may not be familiar with kale. So we've done a lot of work around that.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. So I know we're supposed to transition over, but we have two really great questions. So I'm going to ask our speakers to answer their questions as quickly as possible because I do think they're very important. One is from Corey, and he asked, what do you attribute the member organization sustainable participation through the years? What do you think the reason is some of the organizations that are part of your coalitions have stayed through the years? So I don't know, Mary.
I can start. And I really want to just also say thank you to New Jersey Health Initiatives. We went through something called Boundary Spanning Leadership training and really helped us dive deep into what does shared leadership really mean? What are the mechanisms? What does it look like? How do we make decisions together? And I really think shared leadership is the staying power of coalitions. And we really work to create direction, alignment, and commitment between our partners. We're member driven. We're working to be more resident driven. And I think that the staying power is really that organizational missions are aligned to the mission of the Food Policy Council. And we respect boundaries so that when someone says, hey, this doesn't really align with what I'm tasked to do, even though I really care about it, we say, thank you, we appreciate your good wishes, well, that's okay. We respect and value no, I think. And then we really work hard to collaborate on funding so that, the financial sustainability of organizations, is important. And so we look to mobilize funding and do that together.
Yeah, and in New Brunswick, I would say, we have a history of working together on various projects. Our umbrella organization for Healthier New Brunswick, we were able to get funding through the Robert Johnson Foundation to do a culture of health work, really, solidifying our work as in collective impact around health issues, food security being a major social determinant of health, right? And that spawned off, to networks such as the Food Alliance, as well as our Feeding New Brunswick network, which is a network of food pantries in the city. And so learning to coalesce as much as we can when we have commonality, knowing that there's always going to be, different focuses, but always striving to find that shared vision so that we can move forward, right? Is I think the integral key to any type of coalition work.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then Melanie asks a question about, difficulty with compensating some community members versus others. How do you make these decisions? And what do you do when you have limited funds and need to, have a more participatory kind of a response? So if I know, Mary, you were saying that, they're starting to compensate for, the community member input. And then Kara, if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about the community participatory kind of support that you guys provide as well. Go ahead, Mary.
I appreciate Melanie's question. This is certainly something that we've wrestled with and did a lot of research around. We really appreciate, again, the Food Policy Council network. We saw other models that were working and successful in other places. And, I think that we created a very clear description of what it meant to be a resident advisory board member. That there was a specific role and responsibility to provide strategic direction, policy review of our work, to make recommendations, to commit to meeting at agreed upon dates and times. So it went beyond the role of, I think, a volunteer that might be volunteering intermittently at a community garden or coming to meetings when they could. That this really was a very clear leadership role. And we recognize that there may be tension around who gets compensated and who doesn't. So we were careful to create roles and responsibility. And we in my opinion, we were asking resident advisory board members to participate in a way that required a level of time and commitment and even advocacy and expertise that went beyond kind of a general volunteer role. And so that's how I would answer that question, but happy to talk more offline about that.
Yeah, I would in what Mary said, just to say that it certainly could be a tension, and for us with the market and our market ambassadors, it was really 3 positions that we were hiring for that it went beyond the role of what another volunteer would do. It was really more of a job that lasted over a significant portion of time. But I would also say that, as we do engage community members, certainly through the market and through the Alliance more generally, we do try to provide other benefits. Certainly with the market, we have the double bucks program if someone's using SNAP or other ways of providing support to them for their engagement with what we're doing. But yeah, it was really just 3 paid jobs that we had.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Kara was saying, with respect to the Alliance, it was all volunteer until not too long ago, where we were able to secure some funding for a coordinator that was kind of basically logistical and operational support, which we've unfortunately lost funding for, right? So it's gone back to full volunteer at this point. But that being said, I think we can all agree about the importance of compensating anybody who does work. Especially community members, right? It shouldn't just be something that you just take for granted. And I think that the proof is in the pudding in terms of individual organizations. I know Elijah's Promise, in addition to what the community farmers market is doing, we have Elijah's Promise that also has student health ambassadors that they stipend. New Brunswick Tomorrow, we have our community health ambassadors, as well as another group of student health ambassadors that will stipend to do a lot of this work, moving forward. In fact, it was the community health ambassadors during the beginning of the pandemic that really were a driving force in trying to get people connected to food pantries, as we kept hearing that a lot of people needed a lot of assistance with food.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for your insight and your collective knowledge in this area. I think it gave us all a lot to think about. And I hope for all of the viewers that you realize you are not alone in this. We are all here to support you and help you think through what would work for your community. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Janine, who is going to help us go into the next section of the program. But I want to thank you so much for hanging in there.
Yeah, that was really incredible. I just really admire being at the early stage of this, really admire. There's no amount of journal article reading about food policy councils that can substitute for hearing from folks who've been through it, been doing it. So I really appreciate the 3 of you for participating today and sharing. So maybe we could just take like a 30-second stretch or 1-minute bathroom break, perhaps. I do notice that we're losing folks. So please take a minute, take a break, take a breath of fresh air outside and come back, because we are going to move into discussion groups based on the region of the state that you're in. And we have, I'll show you the questions. We're going to talk about, just what you're thinking after learning all of this, like how, just reflecting on what you've heard in terms of how could a food policy council support your current work, what barriers do you anticipate, and stuff like that. So let's take a minute. And what time do we have? 3:09 or 3:10. So let's try to, what do you think, Sarah? I think we can ask folks to come back at like 3:13.
Sure. So let's meet back at 3:13. And we hope you'll come back to kind of continue the conversation and help build our table together. Thank you so much.
And also we have resources and next steps to share afterward too. So take a stretch and come right back.
And anybody that's staying, you can feel free to just stretch right here. Which is what I'm going to be doing.
Did you want to, you had messaged me that you wanted to say something, Sarah Kupis. Am I getting that wrong?
Well, I just wanted to make note of, all of the efforts that we're hearing about today, and how great they are. And knowing that there are also other efforts that are going on throughout the state. They may not all be classified as a food policy council. Some of them have different names, collaboratives, alliances, other kinds of councils, and just that there's a lot of other efforts and learnings going on throughout the state. And I think, this, obviously we just have the opportunity to hear from just a few folks today, and not everyone, and I think it speaks also to, the opportunity to do this more often and be able to collaborate, kind of across counties and across the state on what everybody's doing, because there's a lot of work that's really good work that's being done. And I don't know that we always know what everyone's doing.
Right.
It's a good opportunity to learn. That's all. Thanks.
Janine, I can put up a timer if you want so people know when to come back.
Yes. Does it make a loud noise when it reaches the time?
I don't know. We'll see.
I think maybe I misinterpreted Sarah's question for requesting stretching.
I just meant like a quick,
Oh.
quick stretch, but that's okay. I'm sure people don't mind the few minute break. It's funny. This timer reminds me of my kindergartner who's doing virtual school, except hers always had like really cute music that went along with the timer and like rainbow pictures and different things from the teacher. Yeah. So Sarah, of course this one's fine, but it doesn't have music or pretty pictures.
There's no unicorns.
Not as fun.
Be better next time.
Right.
I know. I was just saying when we were waiting in the beginning, I was at a summit with third and fourth graders, and they had the Trolls soundtrack playing until everyone joins. And I was like, I wish we could have done that.
Awesome.
There will be more. And I think one of the questions that we should ask, maybe in the breakout sessions, maybe not, maybe when we return, or maybe it's a follow-up question. I think probably is best.
Might not have time for much more.
Yeah, like what role, like should we, what, and I think that's also an internal question, like what role can we all play, like the Food Democracy Collaborative and Mary and other folks in, Manny and Mary and all their institutional knowledge with like what does it look like to support moving forward folks who are interested in starting regional food policy councils. We'll have to do a survey on that.
Yeah, I agree. And how to link everybody together, because I think there are efforts, that I think we would be able to streamline taking them up to the state, versus
Right.
working in our silos locally or regionally, right. or countywide.
Because we're all going to be dealing to some extent with the same issues.
Yeah.
Like I always say to students, like the food environment, the choice environment of the food system is not always at the local or even county level, right?
That's right.
All right. Back in action. So I'm going to, am I not screen sharing anymore? I thought I was.
No, you're not, because I had to share my.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry. So we have our 4 breakout sessions. So identify the county that you live or work in your food system work or as a food citizen. And I'm going to, let's see, launch those breakout rooms, and you'll have to self-select. So it's not going to auto-assign you. You actually have to click on the breakout room that you want to go into. And I think I gave it 15 minutes. I can cut it shorter if I need to.
Yeah, you might-
And then the questions that we're going to be working with in each of those breakout sessions are here. And there is an assigned facilitator for each room. On the slide, I'll be in the Jersey Shore or the Shore region. Well, we know who we are, so I'm going to open the rooms now. See you in a bit.
And for those of you that don't get the prompt, you need to go into breakout rooms, the button at the bottom.
I'm not seeing how I go into a breakout room.
You
though.
don't get the prompt.
I want to go. Are you seeing that, Sarah? How do you go into?
Yeah, I don't know how to get in either.
Maybe,
Is that because
yeah.
we're
I
host?
think it might be.
Oh, you can just click on the number, Janine, and you can join
Thank you.
in your group.
Thank you. So are we back together or are we, I'm confused. You're muted, Sarah.
Yeah, we didn't get kicked off. We just, I realized that it had been a couple minutes since you said 1 minute. So we just all came back. So maybe, did you close
Okay.
breakout rooms?
I think I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's any more breakout rooms. I think we just lost a lot of people over.
Some people.
I don't know. It looks like Central Jersey still.
Can you close them out?
It says all breakout rooms will close in 24 seconds. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, but we didn't want to close. We were really.
So us too, we needed more
Yeah.
time for breakouts. Lesson learned.
Yeah, lesson learned. But we could have, originally we had this meeting going till 4:30 and then we said, no, there's not going to be, no one except maybe me and you are that hardcore. But we had a great conversation. I don't know what the sort of appetite for report out is at this point.
I think we promised to be done at 3:30. It's 3:35.
Yeah.
I say we wrap with some next steps. If you could throw up the next step slide, Janine, that would be great. I think overall we've had just some really wonderful conversations today. Our breakouts, we talked a little bit about, what do we do from the broader kind of scope of New Jersey around food policy councils, but then what does that look like on the local and regional level? And does alignment in those two things make sense? And really looking at having those people in those areas determine what makes sense for them, right? So not kind of dictating that. So
Yes.
it's important.
And I think probably what we should do is just each of us who are in the breakout, like each of our moderators should
We'll put
write up a
together-
summary of that. Yeah.
I think that makes sense. We'll all put together notes. We will be sending out a lot of information and follow up for this, including another survey and some more information that we gathered. But we look forward to continuing this discussion with everyone. We want to ask everyone to join the New Jersey Food Democracy Collaborative, to join the Food Policy Network listserv with Rachel, to look out for a follow-up email. We'll have recordings and resources from today. Connect with your local Rutgers Cooperative Extension and reach out to regional SNAP Ed providers to see how they can support you as well. So thank you all today for your time. I'm sorry we went over so many minutes. It just speaks to the great need for this conversation. And so thank you all for being a part of it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will be in touch very soon.
Okay.
Thank you guys
Thanks,
for hosting.
everyone.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.